The words landed like a hammer dropped on a glass table. And ultimately, this failure sits with Ethan. Flat. Cold. Final. I felt every head in that boardroom turn toward me at the same time. No one hesitated. No one looked confused. They just turned, all at once, like they had been waiting for a name to attach to all that disappointment. My director, Marcus Webb, didn't even look in my direction when he said it. He just clicked to the next slide. Calm. Unbothered. Like he had simply stated the weather outside. The projector hummed. The new slide appeared. And my name, my actual name, sat inside a bullet point in a $12 million post-mortem report like it had always belonged there. 3 years. 3 years of early mornings, late nights, skipped lunches, and weekends spent on calls with clients 7 time zones away. 3 years of being the person everyone leaned on when a deal got complicated. And Marcus had just erased all of it in one sentence. What frightened me most wasn't the accusation. It was how smoothly he said it. Like he had rehearsed it. Like the decision had been made long before this room. My name is Ethan Cole. Senior Partnerships Manager at Crestfield Advisory Group. 3 years in the role. Before that, 2 years as an associate at a smaller firm where I learned how deals actually work, not in theory, but in pressure, in silence, in the moments when everything nearly falls apart and someone has to hold it together. That someone was usually me. I was good at this job. Not in a loud, self-promoting way. In a quiet, results speak for themselves way. My client retention rate was the highest on the floor. My deal pipeline had never once missed a quarterly target. Not once. And yet, right now, in this room, none of that existed. 10 seconds had just erased 3 years of credibility. I didn't speak. I didn't stand up or slam my hands on the table or demand an explanation. Because the way Marcus had said my name, cool, rehearsed, almost gentle, told me something important. This wasn't a mistake made in the heat of panic. This was a decision. Planned. Deliberate. Possibly prepared days ago. And decisions like that are never made alone. I looked down at the notepad in front of me and took one slow breath. Calm was the only weapon I had right now. So I held it. Nobody questioned him. Not immediately. Not out loud. Pens moved. Laptops clicked. One of the senior executives, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Osei, nodded slowly, with the particular kind of nod that says this confirms what I already suspected. That nod cut deeper than anything Marcus had said. I watched the room process it. Watched the story settle into people like cement poured into cracks. Once it hardened, it would be almost impossible to break apart. That was the real danger here. Not the accusation itself. Accusations can be challenged. Evidence can be shown. People can be corrected. But a room full of senior people who have already accepted a version of the truth? That takes something else entirely. You can't argue your way out of that. You can't raise your hand and say actually and expect anyone to really listen. You need to change what they see, not what you say. I knew this. I had watched it happen to someone else 2 years ago, a colleague named Philip Dawes who got blamed for a failed client migration and was out of the company within 3 months. No drama. No big confrontation. Just a story that hardened before he could stop it. I was not going to let that happen to me. The deal was called the Hartwell Partnership. It wasn't small. It wasn't a routine renewal or a mid-tier account we were hoping to close before the quarter ended. This was the anchor deal, the one Marcus had personally presented to the board in January as the centerpiece of our growth strategy for the year. $12 million over 3 years. A long-term partnership with Hartwell Group, one of the biggest regional distributors in the country. Exclusive preferred supplier terms. A clause that would open doors to 4 additional companies in their portfolio. It was, on paper, the kind of deal that makes careers. I had led every piece of the negotiation. Every call. Every revised term sheet. Every careful back and forth about pricing structure and delivery timelines and liability clauses. I had spent 6 months building trust with the Hartwell team, specifically with their head of procurement, a meticulous man named Oliver Brass, who did not make decisions lightly and did not forgive sloppy mistakes. Every week I sent Marcus a full update. Every concern I had, I flagged early. I ran this deal the way I had run every deal before it. Carefully. Thoroughly. Honestly. And then, slowly, things started to change. It started with a meeting I wasn't invited to. Mid-February. I saw it on the shared calendar, a slot blocked out with Hartwell's legal team and 2 names from our side, Marcus and our CFO, a quiet man named Tom Hale. No explanation. No agenda attached. When I asked Marcus about it afterward, He waved it off. Quick sync, he said, scrolling through his phone like the question was barely worth answering. Nothing major. Just some structural stuff Tom wanted to walk through. I nodded. I let it go. But decisions came out of that meeting. Real ones. The payment schedule shifted. What had been a milestone-based structure, tied to delivery phases we had already agreed with Hartwell, was suddenly reframed as a front-loaded model. More money up front for us. More risk on their side. I hadn't been consulted. I found out when I saw the revised term sheet appear in the shared folder with Marcus's name in the edit history. I sent him a message that evening. Calm. Specific. Did we agree to move the payment structure? Oliver's team pushed back hard on front-loading in our last session. He replied 2 hours later. Don't worry. Sorted. Nothing else. Then came more changes. Quietly. One by one. The delivery timeline was compressed by 3 weeks on our end, meaning we would be promising Hartwell something we could not realistically deliver without pulling staff off 2 other active accounts. The exclusivity clause was softened. A line that had taken me 4 sessions to get Hartwell to agree to was quietly removed and replaced with vague preferred supplier language that meant almost nothing in legal terms. The tone of our written communications shifted too. Messages that had been precise and professional became warmer, more casual. Language that feels friendlier but creates enormous gray areas when something eventually goes wrong. Each time I noticed a change, I pushed back. Each time, Marcus overruled me. Not aggressively. Never aggressively. He had a way of making you feel like the concern was reasonable but slightly unnecessary. Like a careful driver who kept checking the mirrors too often. Trust me on this one, Ethan, he said once, leaning back with the easy confidence of someone 15 years further in the industry. Hartwell responds to momentum. Too many questions slow that down. I wanted to believe him. So I told myself I was being too cautious. That was my mistake. I started noticing the emails. It happened gradually. I would finish a call with Oliver Brass and his team, and within an hour Marcus would send a follow-up summary to the broader group, including senior people who weren't on the original call. Standard practice. Nothing unusual. Except the summaries weren't quite right. Not wrong exactly. Not so wrong that I could point at one line and say this is a lie. More like adjusted. Tilted. A concern I had flagged would appear as something already resolved. A Hartwell objection would be softened into a minor question. A commitment I had proposed, but not confirmed, would appear as agreed. Small changes. Individually, each one looked like nothing. Together, they were building something. A version of events where Marcus was steering and I was along for the ride. A version where his decisions were strategic and my concerns were noise. I started saving everything. Every email. Every meeting note. Every message in our internal system. I created a folder on my personal work drive and dated everything carefully. I wasn't entirely sure why at the time. I just knew that something about the shape of what was happening didn't feel right. And I had learned, long ago, to trust that feeling. You're too deep in it, Marcus told me one afternoon. We were debriefing after a call with Hartwell's procurement team. The call had gone fine on the surface, polite, professional, but I had caught something in Oliver Brass's tone. A flatness. The kind of careful neutral that experienced people use when they are unhappy but not yet ready to say so. I told Marcus what I heard. He smiled in that patient, measured way of his. Ethan. You've been on this account so long you're starting to read problems that aren't there. Step back. See the bigger picture. So I tried. I stepped back. I looked at the bigger picture. I told myself that Marcus had relationships at this level that I didn't have. That he could see angles I couldn't. That maybe I was too close to it. But the bigger picture didn't feel right either. Oliver's team had gone quieter. Response times had stretched from same day to 2 days to sometimes 3. Small things, but in deal negotiations, small things are never small. They are signals. Hartwell was pulling back. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice, if you were paying attention. I was paying attention. And what I was seeing worried me. 2 weeks before the deal collapsed, I wrote the email. I sat at my desk on a Tuesday evening, the office mostly empty, and I laid it out clearly. No drama. No accusations. Just facts, ordered carefully, with specific references and dates attached. I told Marcus that Hartwell's response pattern had changed. That Oliver Brass had cancelled 2 calls in the past 10 days and rescheduled them without explanation. That the revised timeline we had committed to was, in my honest assessment, no longer achievable without serious resource strain. That the softened exclusivity clause had removed the one term Hartwell had originally said was non-negotiable, and that removing it without a direct conversation was a risk. I asked him to loop in the legal team before we moved to the signature phase. I asked him to consider delaying the final sign-off by 2 weeks so we could have one more alignment call with Hartwell's senior leadership. I sent it at 7:14 in the evening. I kept the sent confirmation. He replied the next morning. One line. Handled. No follow-up. No call. No explanation of what exactly had been handled or how. Just that single word, sitting there in my inbox like a door being shut quietly in my face. It wasn't handled. Hartwell pulled out on a Wednesday morning. I found out through Oliver Brass, not Marcus. Oliver sent a short, formal email directly to me, copied to no one, thanking us for our time and stating that Hartwell had decided to pursue a different direction. The tone was professional. Careful. The tone of someone advised by lawyers to say very little. I read it 3 times. Then I walked to Marcus's office. He was already on a call. He held up one finger without looking at me and turned his chair slightly away. I went back to my desk. Within 2 hours, the narrative had started to move. I could feel it, conversations that went quiet when I walked past. A message from Tom Hale's assistant asking me to compile my deal notes and send them to Marcus by end of day. Not to the review team. To Marcus. I sent everything. Every document, every note, every version of the term sheet. Including the email folder I had been quietly building for 2 months. I made sure I had a personal copy of all of it, somewhere Marcus could not reach. Because the narrative was forming fast. Too fast. Like it had been waiting. Back in the boardroom, Marcus was still talking. And due to a series of misaligned expectations on the ground level, he said, his voice carrying the measured weight of someone delivering a careful verdict, we lost the Hartwell deal. Misaligned expectations. That was the phrase he chose. Not overridden decisions. Not ignored risk flags. Not a restructured payment model pushed through without the lead negotiator's agreement. Just 3 smooth, blame-shaped words. Misaligned expectations. And the room accepted it. Because it sounded reasonable. It sounded like the kind of language that comes from an honest post-mortem, not from a man who had spent 2 months quietly repositioning himself above the consequences of his own choices. I watched Patricia Osei type something into her laptop. 2 board members exchanged a glance that said we'll discuss this later. Marcus clicked to another slide, one titled Path Forward, as though we were already past the part where someone needed to be held responsible. The slide appeared. He began speaking again. His voice was smooth. Confident. The voice of someone who had already decided the previous chapter was closed. I had 2 options. Stay quiet and let the story finish hardening completely. Or say one thing. Just one. I set down my pen. Then I spoke. Can we pull up the email chain? My voice was steady. Not loud. Not sharp. Just clear, the way you speak when you are not asking a question so much as placing something on the table. The room went slightly still. Marcus paused mid-click. Just for a second. A half-beat shorter than natural. The kind of pause that isn't long enough to be obvious but is long enough to notice, if you know what you're looking for. Then he smiled. It was a good smile. Relaxed. Slightly amused. The smile of someone who is not threatened. I don't think that's necessary, Ethan, he said. The report covers the timeline. We don't need to dig through every email in a boardroom setting. He said it like he was doing me a favor. Like pulling up the emails would embarrass me and he was kindly sparing me that. He turned back to the board. I said nothing. I didn't push. Didn't repeat myself. Didn't let any frustration show on my face. Because I had learned something important about moments like this. If you push too hard, the room watches you and wonders why you're so desperate to redirect. If you stay calm, the room wonders why you're so calm. I needed the room wondering. It might be. The voice came from the far end of the table. Quiet. Measured. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because the position behind it supplies all the weight it needs. Her name was Adiz Nwosu. Head of legal at Crestfield. She had been in the role for 9 years and had the reputation of someone who chose her words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, precisely and never without purpose. She had not spoken once during the entire meeting. I'd like to see the original correspondence, she said. Not the summary document. The original email chain, in sequence. She wasn't asking Marcus. She was telling the room. And the room understood the difference immediately. One of the board members, a heavy-set man named Arthur Fennick who chaired the audit committee, leaned forward slightly in his chair. Just slightly. But the lean said everything. It said, "I'm paying attention now." Marcus held his smile. He looked at Adiz the way someone looks at a minor inconvenience they are confident they can manage. "Adiz, I think the report is comprehensive." "The report was written by your team," she said simply. No accusation in her tone. Just a fact, placed quietly on the table. And just like that, the room shifted. Marcus didn't flinch. That was what surprised me most. He leaned back in his chair, crossed one arm loosely over the other, and looked around the table with the easy expression of a man who had done nothing wrong and therefore had nothing to fear. "Sure," he said. "Pull it up. It's going to show the same thing as the report." He said it almost casually. Like a man offering to show his work because the answer is obviously correct. And I realized something then, something that was almost frightening in its clarity. Marcus believed this. Not that he was innocent. He knew what he had done. He knew every decision he had made, every email he had adjusted, every risk flag he had dismissed with a single dismissive word. But he believed something more dangerous than innocence. He believed that his version of events, the version he had been carefully building and distributing for months, was now the real version. That because the board had heard his framing first, because the summary report carried his signature, because no one had challenged him yet, the story had already been decided. He believed that controlling the narrative was the same thing as controlling the truth. That was the error that was about to cost him everything. I didn't add anything. Didn't look at Marcus. Didn't look at Adiz. Didn't glance around the room to see who was watching me or what their faces were doing. I just leaned back in my chair, folded my hands on the table, and waited. From the outside, I probably looked like a man who had accepted his situation. Resigned? Maybe. Quiet in the way people are quiet when they know the argument is already over. That was fine. Let Marcus think the same thing. The truth was, I had been preparing for a version of this moment for nearly 8 weeks. From the evening I first noticed the pattern in those follow-up emails. From the day Marcus replied handled and I sat at my desk, reading that single word, and made a quiet decision. I had not confronted him. Had not gone to HR with half a story and no proof. Had not left a trail of complaints that could be dismissed as a difficult employee's behavior. I had simply kept saving. Every email, in order, timestamps intact, in a folder only I could access. Because patience, I had learned, is not passive. Sometimes patience is the sharpest thing in the room. And I had been patient for 8 weeks. Now I just needed the room to look. Adiz's assistant brought her laptop to the table and connected it to the room's display screen. The projector shifted. Marcus's polished slide deck disappeared, replaced by the plain interface of an email client, the company's internal system, raw and unformatted, nothing beautified or summarized or shaped by anyone's version of events. Just the original thread. Oldest message at the top. Adiz scrolled slowly. Not rushing. Letting the room adjust to the change in what they were looking at. Letting people understand that what they were about to see was not filtered. I watched Marcus from the corner of my eye. His posture changed. Not dramatically, he was too experienced for that. But the easy, crossed arm lean softened slightly. His right hand moved from his arm to the table surface. A small adjustment. A subconscious one. He was recalculating. I had seen that movement before. I had seen it on the faces of clients who had just realized that the term they were certain said one thing actually said something different. That micro-shift between confidence and the first arrival of doubt. It lasted less than 3 seconds before Marcus smoothed his expression back into place. But I had been watching for it. And I had seen it. There, Adiz said. She stopped scrolling. The email filled the screen. Clean. Timestamped. My name in the sender field. Marcus Webb in the recipient field. Date, March 4, 7:14 p.m. She read the subject line aloud. Risk flag, Hartwell Partnership, urgent review requested. Then she read the key paragraph. Not dramatically. Just steadily, the way you read a document into a formal record so that every person present understands exactly what it says. She read the part where I flagged Hartwell's changed response pattern. The part where I noted the timeline was no longer achievable without serious strain. The part where I asked, specifically, in writing, for a 2-week delay before the final sign-off. The part where I asked for the legal team to be looped in before anything was finalized. The room was completely silent. No pens moving. No laptops clicking. Arthur Fennick had both hands flat on the table. Patricia Osei had stopped typing entirely. 2 weeks before the collapse. Documented. Specific. Timestamped. Every concern Marcus had described, 40 minutes ago, as something that simply never happened, laid out plainly on the screen for every person in that room to read. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. The response? Adiz asked. She scrolled slightly. And there it was. Marcus Webb. Sent, March 5, 9:02 a.m. One line. The only line. Handled. She didn't read it dramatically. She simply moved the screen so the full room could see it clearly. Subject line. Sender. Timestamp. One word. Handled. No follow-up message. No record of any action taken. No meeting scheduled. No legal team looped in. No delay requested. No second conversation with Hartwell's senior leadership. Just a door closed on a documented concern and then silence for 2 weeks until the whole thing fell apart. The room didn't react loudly. There was no gasp. No outburst. No one slapped their hand on the table. But the energy changed the way air changes before a storm, not dramatic, not sudden, but something shifting underneath everything, a pressure adjusting. I saw Arthur Fennick look at Marcus. Marcus looked at the screen. For the first time since I had known him, his face was doing something it rarely did. It was working. You could see it, the small mechanical effort of keeping his expression composed. The slight tightening around the eyes. The jaw set just a fraction harder than natural. The story he had been so certain about had just developed its first visible crack. Let's continue, Adiz said. She scrolled forward through the weeks before the collapse. More emails appeared. Mine first. A follow-up on March 8, asking whether the legal review had been scheduled. Marcus's reply, not yet. I'll handle it this week. He did not handle it that week. Then March 12, Marcus sending a revised instruction to the Hartwell account team, adjusting our delivery commitment without consulting me or acknowledging the concern I had already raised in writing. Then March 16. My message, Oliver Brass has pushed back the call twice. Should we be concerned? Marcus's reply, he's just busy. Keep the energy positive. Then March 19, Marcus directing the contracts team to finalize paperwork for the signature phase. No mention of my pending risk review. No note that concerns had been raised and needed resolving. Just a push forward, carrying his name. Each email appeared in order. Every one of them a step. Not dramatic on its own. But together they told a clear, time-stamped story, a senior person making decisions over the head of the account lead, while dismissing every documented concern that person kept raising with patience and consistency. The room watched it build, piece by piece. And no one looked away. And this, Adiz said. She paused on one specific email. This appears to be a summary of the March 14 review call, sent by Mr. Webb to the executive distribution list. She read the key section aloud. In Marcus's version, the March 14 call had been a smooth alignment session. Minor questions raised by Hartwell's team. All resolved. Timeline confirmed. Both parties enthusiastic about moving to signature phase. Then she scrolled back to the actual notes from that call, the ones I had typed into our shared system immediately afterward, while the conversation was still fresh. Oliver Brass had raised 3 significant concerns. One about the front-loaded payment structure. One about the compressed delivery timeline. One about the softened exclusivity clause, the one Oliver had originally described as non-negotiable. I had written all 3 down. Flagged them as unresolved. Marcus's summary to the executive team contained none of them. Same meeting. Same date. Same participants. Different story. The room understood what it was looking at. This wasn't a misremembering. This wasn't a difference of interpretation or a gap in communication. This was a rewritten record. Sent deliberately to the people who made decisions. Designed to keep a version of events alive that protected one person and buried another. The silence in that room was absolute. Marcus tried. I'll give him that. He tried. These are being taken out of. No. Adiz's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It landed with exactly the weight it required. It lasted less than 3 seconds before Marcus smoothed his expression back into place. But I had been watching for it. And I had seen it. There, Adiz said. She stopped scrolling. The email filled the screen. Clean. Time-stamped. My name in the sender field. Marcus Webb in the recipient field. Date, March 4, 7:14 p.m. She read the subject line aloud. Risk flag, Hartwell Partnership, urgent review requested. Then she read the key paragraph. Not dramatically. Just steadily, The way you read a document into a formal record so that every person present understands exactly what it says. She read the part where I flagged Hartwell's changed response pattern. The part where I noted the timeline was no longer achievable without serious strain. The part where I asked, specifically, in writing, for a 2-week delay before the final sign-off. The part where I asked for the legal team to be looped in before anything was finalized. The room was completely silent. No pens moving. No laptops clicking. Arthur Fennick had both hands flat on the table. Patricia Osei had stopped typing entirely. 2 weeks before the collapse. Documented. Specific. Timestamped. Every concern Marcus had described, 40 minutes ago, as something that simply never happened, laid out plainly on the screen for every person in that room to read. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. The response. Adiz asked. She scrolled slightly. And there it was. Marcus Webb. Sent, March 5th, 9:02 a.m. One line. The only line. Handled. She didn't read it dramatically. She simply moved the screen so the full room could see it clearly. Subject line. Sender. Timestamp. One word. Handled. No follow-up message. No record of any action taken. No meeting scheduled. No legal team looped in. No delay requested. No second conversation with Hartwell's senior leadership. Just a door closed on a documented concern and then silence for 2 weeks until the whole thing fell apart. The room didn't react loudly. There was no gasp. No outburst. No one slapped their hand on the table. But the energy changed the way air changes before a storm. Not dramatic, not sudden, but something shifting underneath everything, a pressure adjusting. I saw Arthur Fennick look at Marcus. Marcus looked at the screen. For the first time since I had known him, his face was doing something it rarely did. It was working. You could see it, the small mechanical effort of keeping his expression composed. The slight tightening around the eyes. The jaw set just a fraction harder than natural. The story he had been so certain about had just developed its first visible crack. Let's continue, Adiz said. She scrolled forward through the weeks before the collapse. More emails appeared. Mine first. A follow-up on March 8th, asking whether the legal review had been scheduled. Marcus's reply, not yet. I'll handle it this week. He did not handle it that week. Then March 12th, Marcus sending a revised instruction to the Hartwell account team, adjusting our delivery commitment without consulting me or acknowledging the concern I had already raised in writing. Then March 16th. My message, Oliver Brass has pushed back the call twice. Should we be concerned? Marcus's reply, he's just busy. Keep the energy positive. Then March 19th, Marcus directing the contracts team to finalize paperwork for the signature phase. No mention of my pending risk review. No note that concerns had been raised and needed resolving. Just a push forward, carrying his name. Each email appeared in order. Every one of them a step. Not dramatic on its own. But together they told a clear, time-stamped story, a senior person making decisions over the head of the account lead, while dismissing every documented concern that person kept raising with patience and consistency. The room watched it build, piece by piece. And no one looked away. And this, Adiz said. She paused on one specific email. This appears to be a summary of the March 14th review call, sent by Mr. Webb to the executive distribution list. She read the key section aloud. In Marcus's version, the March 14th call had been a smooth alignment session. Minor questions raised by Hartwell's team. All resolved. Timeline confirmed. Both parties enthusiastic about moving to signature phase. Then she scrolled back to the actual notes from that call, the ones I had typed into our shared system immediately afterward, while the conversation was still fresh. Oliver Brass had raised 3 significant concerns. One about the front-loaded payment structure. One about the compressed delivery timeline. One about the softened exclusivity clause, the one Oliver had originally described as non-negotiable. I had written all 3 down. Flagged them as unresolved. Marcus's summary to the executive team contained none of them. Same meeting. Same date. Same participants. Different story. The room understood what it was looking at. This wasn't a misremembering. This wasn't a difference of interpretation or a gap in communication. This was a rewritten record. Sent deliberately to the people who made decisions. Designed to keep a version of events alive that protected one person and buried another. The silence in that room was absolute. Marcus tried. I'll give him that. He tried. These are being taken out of. No. Adiz's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It landed with exactly the weight it required. "They're being read in order," she said. "From the original system. Unedited. In sequence." She said it without looking at Marcus. "The way you state a fact that is not open to interpretation." And that was the moment. Not the email. Not the one-word reply. Not the rewritten summary. This moment, Adiz continuing to scroll, calmly, while Marcus sat with the specific stillness of a person who has just understood that the ground beneath them is no longer solid. Control had left him. He had walked into this room as the person shaping the story. As the director delivering the verdict. As the senior voice the board would believe. In 12 minutes, without a single raised voice, that position had been removed from him. Not by me. By the record. By the timestamps and subject lines and one-word dismissals and carefully rewritten summaries, all of it sitting untouched in the company's own system. I had known it was there. I had simply been waiting for someone to look. Arthur Fenwick spoke. He leaned forward slowly, both forearms resting on the table, and looked at the screen for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful, the voice of someone summarizing evidence, not making an accusation. "Ethan raised the risk," he said. "Not a question. A conclusion, stated plainly for the record. Documented. Timestamped. 2 weeks before the deal collapsed." He paused. "And you dismissed it." He looked at Marcus when he said that last part. Marcus said nothing. He opened his mouth. I saw it happen, the small preparation for a sentence that never arrived, and then closed it again. Because there was no answer that worked. Not with the email chain still on the screen. Not with every executive in that room having read the same sequence in the same order, arriving at the same conclusion independently. Patricia Osei was writing careful, formal notes, the kind that go into official records and stay there. Tom Hale was looking at his hands. Nobody spoke for Marcus. Not one person offered a different reading or suggested the emails needed more context. Not even the people who had been nodding along with him 40 minutes earlier. Because there was no more context left to offer. The meeting ended before it should have. No formal adjournment. No closing summary. No final slide. Marcus had one prepared, I had seen the full deck, but no one asked for it. Arthur Fenwick gathered his papers. Patricia Osei closed her laptop. People moved with the quiet, purposeful energy of a group that has seen enough and now has things to do. Marcus sat in his chair as others filed out around him. I walked out without looking at him. Within 2 days, I received a formal notice from the Internal Review Committee confirming that a structured review of the Hartwell account had been opened and that my full documentation had been requested and received. 3 days later, a second notice. The scope had been escalated to the board's audit committee, Arthur Fenwick's committee. By the end of that week, Marcus Webb was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Within 3 weeks, the review concluded. He was not reassigned to a different team. Not given a lesser title and asked to rebuild. He was removed. Completely. Formally. Without a press release or a company-wide message. Just a name no longer in the system. A calendar suddenly empty. An office that quietly, without ceremony, became a storage space. 3 weeks after Marcus was removed, I was called back into the boardroom. The same room. The same long table. The same chairs. But the weight in that room was completely different. Arthur Fenwick sat at the head of the table. Patricia Osei was there. Adiz Nwosu was there. 2 other board members whose names I had known for 3 years but had never sat down with directly. Nobody had a slide deck. There was no presentation waiting on the projector screen. No report to walk through. No post-mortem language. Arthur Fenwick spoke first. "Would like you to lead the next major negotiation," he said. "The Dunmore account. It's comparable to Hartwell in scale, possibly larger." He paused. "This isn't a recovery assignment, Ethan. We're not handing you something to prove you're still useful. We're giving you this because the record shows you have the judgment this company needs at that level." I looked around the table. Patricia Osei nodded once. Adiz Nwosu said nothing, but the expression on her face was clear enough. I thought about everything I had carried for the past 3 months. Every night I had gone home wondering if the story had already hardened. Every moment I had stayed quiet when I wanted to shout. "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it. Months later, the Dunmore deal closed. Clean. Strong. On time. Every term landed where I said it would. Every concern I raised was documented, discussed, and resolved before it could grow into a problem. Every summary I sent to the executive team was accurate, because I wrote every word myself. There was no drama at the end. No boardroom reveal. No projector screen. Just a signed agreement, a smooth client call, and a short message from Arthur Fennick. Well done. I saved that message. I save everything. Not out of fear. Not because I'm preparing for the next person who might hand me their consequences. I save things because the truth needs a place to live. Because timelines matter. Because the difference between someone who survives and someone who gets quietly erased is often nothing more than documentation and patience. Marcus had believed that controlling the story was the same as controlling the truth. He was wrong. Stories can be adjusted. Summaries can be rewritten. A word like handled can close a door on something important. But timestamps don't lie. And a person patient enough to save the truth, quietly, without drama, while others build versions of events that serve only themselves. That person doesn't need to argue. They just need to wait for someone to open the emails.